all have stories. Every single one of us. From the highest of the high to the lowest of the low, we all have stories. Exploring the world for the greatest stories of all time.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to the Aron O'Dowd Show.
The Aron O'Dowd Show. Our soul is the screen upon which we project our dreams. What's your story?
Hello, everybody. Welcome, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all. It's the Aron O'Dowd Show again. Another incredible planning today. You know, planning is so important in what we do, from, getting up in the morning, doing our day, having successful businesses. And my guest today is all about this. He is a man of many layers. He's kind of like a comedian through his life and his story, but his objective is to get businesses planning correctly and to be successful from the highest to the lowest and in between, to see what makes them incredible. Our guest is Rob Wherrett. And hello, welcome to the show, Rob. How are you doing?
Hi, Aron. It's good to see you. Good to be out there for everybody.
Oh, for sure. Tell us what makes you incredible, Rob.
What makes me incredible? It's a weird thing. I've always been a generalist throughout my life, never a very technical specialist. And that's actually played to be my great strength, because I have a good, broad understanding of lots and lots of things. And what makes me unusual is that when it comes to projects of change, and most organizations, whether they're small, just startups, or even huge corporations or government, do big projects, they need to go through an entire end-to-end process. And there are lots of people who do project management. There are lots of people who do other things in that process. But there are very few, if any, who've got all of the skill set that I've got, because of various things that have happened in my life. And one of those things is that I got involved many years ago with the Open University here in the United Kingdom, and I taught on their management program, their MBA program. I taught the management of creativity, innovation, and change. And that brings together a whole suite of stuff around creativity techniques and all sorts of stuff like that. Now, in most consultancies, you don't get that kind of expertise. But before even that, I do a lot of work with clients where I make sure that they get the right plan for the right solution for the right problem. And that's something that also happens to be a big problem for businesses, because people make assumptions. They think they know what the problem is, and they go off and find the solution to what they think that problem is. And I won't let them do that. And I've never done it. And it's probably something that I get from my mother. So in our lives, I think we have things we have to thank our parents for. And my mother was always one for doing it right the first time.
Wow. Tell us more about doing the right thing.
Well, I'll give you an example. So some years ago, I was working for a big corporate, and we were on developing a big software platform and suite of programs to support the business. And we were in joint venture with a US software house. And the director of the program said to me, would I please take control of developing the print solution to the program? Now, this was at a time before people were using things like Microsoft Word to produce letters and so on from outgoing from an insurance company. It required an actual program to work out and put together the whole suite of letters, forms, and everything else that were required. And I thought about it and I said, okay, I'll do it, but I'll do it on one condition. And they said, what's that? I said, they'll do it my way or I'm not doing it at all. So Kevin, okay, we'll do it your way then. But there was a reason for that, because I knew I'd be under pressure to just get on and make things happen. Now, that's often what happens in business. People say, oh, can you just do this thing? Now, can you get on with it? Just get moving. And my background to that is, no, I want to plan it out and be sure I'm doing the right thing first. Because then I don't have to redo it. I don't have to go back and start all over again. And part of that probably comes back to the fact that I spent 16 years in the British Army in the reserve forces. I wasn't a regular. I was a territorial army, as we know them. And I was in the artillery. And when you're doing artillery planning, you have to be right and you have to get it right first time. There is no excuse for, oh, we got it right, let's try again. because people's lives depended on it. And so there was that piece that was in my background, and it became ingrained. You do that for a while, it just becomes ingrained. I've got to get this right, and I've got to get it right. How do I know I've got it right? And that's a question people don't ask themselves, because in civilian world, they don't have that pressure. So I started by doing that kind of thing, but in these projects and so on. So am I doing the right thing? How will I know it's the right thing? What am I trying to solve here? And that becomes a personal trait, if you like, which is that I refuse to do the wrong thing. So when Kevin said to me, "Can you do this?" I said, "Fine, I'll do it." And then they said, I kept being asked, has it started yet? And I said, "No, it'll take me about 2 or 3 weeks to plan out what we're doing here." "Why haven't you got started?" I said, "Well, because I need to know we're doing the right thing." And I had a team of analysts. And then we got going, and we got it right first time. And that was amazing, because in big software developments, for example, there's usually a database of data items. And in doing things the way I made it work and designed it, we also proved the database, because we'd say this algorithm needs these items of data. Where are they? And if they weren't in the database, then that was down to the people doing the development to find, well, where are they going to come from? How would they get put in the database? Mm-hmm. If you don't ask those kind of questions, then chaos happens, because suddenly there's a piece missing, and it's like putting a jigsaw together, and you know what it's like. If you make a really nice jigsaw and somebody's lost 3 pieces, you really do get pissed off.
You would indeed. Where's the puzzle pieces? It's like, and that's what planning is. What made you get into the artillery force in the army?
Well, that was a coincidence, really. When I went to university back in the 70s, I met somebody who was playing the bagpipes. And I'm quite musical, and this was in Scotland, and I'm quite musical, and I thought, it'd be quite nice while I'm at university to learn to play the bagpipes. And I talked to him, and I said, "Okay, where are you from?" And he said, "Bognor Regis." Now, anybody who knows Bognor Regis, it's right down the Sussex south coast of England. And I said, "What's a guy from Bognor doing playing the bagpipes?" And he said to me, "Well," he said, "I learned to play when I got here." And I said, "Oh, really? Okay, fine." And he said, "Well, if you join the Officer Training Corps at the university," he said, "the pipe major is world champion, and he'll teach you to play the bagpipes." So I thought, "Oh, that's good." I said, "Oh, and I get paid for doing it. And that's even better. As a student, why not? Bit of a side hustle." So I joined, learned to play a scale on the bagpipes, but then got more interested in some of the soldiering aspects, and it went on from there. But it was that pure coincidence on a dark night in September, October, wherever it was, back in the early 70s, flaming torches, and I walked with a whole load of students in Freshers Week, walking down to the end of the pier at the harbour with flaming torches and in the dark. And I had that conversation. And life's like that, I find. It's these crazy, but sometimes unexpected conversations, but then tip you one way. It's like somebody switching the points on a railway track. There's no going back. And I never regretted it.
Wow. How does that feel? You make those instant decisions like you did, like that example.
Well, that one was kind of, I want to learn to play the pipes, and I want to, earn a few quid while I'm doing it. But also, I look back at it and realize that those things like that are significant events in life, and you have to recognize them for that. I've said to Ian, the guy who gave me that advice, he's the guy. He subsequently went on to become the personal piper for the Queen Mother in London many years later. And I'm still in touch with him. We're great friends still. But you have to recognize those events in life and say, okay, that's what happened. And okay, it's changed something. Was it for the better? Was it for the worse? Well, it is what it is in that sense. You can't go back and redo it. But then what do you make of it?
And what did the army teach you?
A lot of discipline. It brought me out. I was quite a quiet, introverted sort of person. It was good fun, but I wasn't very outgoing, and I wasn't very decisive. And it taught me a lot about being confident, being self-confident. And that self-confidence, on the whole, has stood me really good stead for all the years ever since. Because you have to be clear and you know what you're doing and why. There are occasions, even in the army, where you come up against very senior officers who are utter fools, frankly. but you have to be able to stand up to them. I only made it to the rank of captain, but it was good enough. And I I learned out later on that if I'd stayed with one unit, I moved south, so I moved away from the unit I was in. Had I stayed, I would have become an officer commanding, so I'd have made at least major and possibly gone on to be a lieutenant colonel. Who knows? But so what? It doesn't matter. But it's that piece. And also it's the teamwork that came out of it, because you get used. You have to work as a team if you're a soldier, no matter what it is you're doing. And my specialism with the artillery role I had was an artillery observer. We were a specialist unit, and that's all we did. So I had a team of half a dozen guys, a couple of signallers, driver, and all that kind of stuff. And we worked together very closely. And you're living with them day by day when you're out on exercise, and it would have been for real. And you have to get those guys on side doing the stuff you need them to do. You have to trust them, but equally, they need to trust me. They need to trust the boss. And if you take that into the civilian world, that's a great thing to do, because you've got to work with people. I've run all sorts of projects and programs from UK government right down to micro-business startups. I've had clients from Thailand and all sorts of places doing stuff, but it's always the same. Do they trust me to do the right thing with them? And do I help them to understand what they need to do for themselves?
Was it hard to go back to civilian life and spending that long time in the military?
Not really, because I was always inside. It was always in parallel with the civilian life. I always had a day job. While I was a student, I was just a student. But then when I left university, I had a job in London. I worked in accountancy in London, hated it and got out. Went into the leisure industry, did some work in the video game sector for a couple of years, and then moved on from there, moved into financial services. And I spent most of my corporate career working in financial services. In fact, in the big project I was talking about earlier, before I was helping to run that, I was head of marketing for the company. It was a life and pensions company, and quite a big one. And so you get used to it. You get used to this idea, but it's that idea. You bring stuff from outside in, or bring from inside out. There's always this other point of reference, and I think that a lot of people, certainly in the business world, don't have those multiple points of reference. I'm just talking at the moment to a business in Manchester, and they're struggling to understand what they need to do, because their points of reference are constrained to what they know, which is their job, which is in civil engineering and in groundworks, which is fine, and they do it really well. But they don't understand the bigger issues that they're facing, because they just haven't got that experience. They've no way they can bring that into their business, which is why they're talking to me, obviously. But again, that becomes difficult because people just have the constraints. They know what they know. They know how life is with mum and dad, or with their family, or what it is with their mates down the pub, but they don't know about this other stuff. So I think it's, from a point of view of personal development, I thought it was great, because I had the benefit of seeing both sides, and I still do, because although I left the army, and that was quite funny, because I actually retired from the British Army on my mother's 60th birthday. Wow. So curiously, I'm the only guy who's probably actually retired on exactly the same day as his mother.
That's coincidence in some way, Yeah.
It's funny. It's hilarious, but I like it, because you can point at it and people go, okay, well, yeah, but it happened. So that was a long time ago.
Did you ever get to work at MI6 or any espionage or anything like that, or?
Not MI6, however, I may have mentioned this to you, I don't know. Back in the 80s, I was kind of looking for a new role, a new job, and was looking around. And a friend of mine who I knew through the army, he was chief accountant of VMI Records, actually, but I knew him through the military side of his life, because we were in the same unit together in London. And I was looking for help finding a job, and Nick turned to me and he said, if I can help you, I will. And he put me in touch with a guy called Tim. Now, Tim was a recruitment consultant, and he lived down the south coast, and we met up in London, and because I was still in London at the time, or around London. Anyway, I had this conversation with Tim, and Tim put me in touch with MI5, the security service. And I actually went through their selection process. In the end, it didn't work out. But had I been recruited to MI5 at the time, probably by the time I retired, I'd have been deputy director. But that's one of their stories. it was interesting to go through because I went through the whole a big chunk of the selection process before they eventually decided I wasn't quite right for them for whatever the reason they had. I hadn't done anything wrong. It's just they didn't quite see the fit. But going through that whole selection process was interesting. I turned up to a place just off Trafalgar Square for the selection interview. It was over 3 days. And there were a bunch of people in the room, about 20 or 30 people in this room. And eventually somebody came in and said, who's here for the Ministry of Defence? And a few hands went up, and then there was others didn't. They said, well, who here is not for the Ministry of Defence? And who are you for? And they were being recruited to Department of Social Security or something. They took those people all away. And then the rest of us sitting in the room sat and looked at each other and thought, okay, we're all here for something a bit more secret, are we? And it went on from there. But it was an interesting process to go through because there were various case studies to work through, role plays, and so on. And that was all about how you could work and collaborate to get your answers dealt with or answers brought out and solutions to problems. I remember the solution, or the problem we were faced with was about putting a tunnel across Portsmouth Harbour for some reason, for a road tunnel, and I had to play the role of one of the people in this scenario. But it was interesting to do. But looking back on it, I mean, I've still got the paperwork. There it is, in the Royal Crest on it, the Department Crest, from what was in those days a very, very secretive organisation, not so much so now. And I was sworn to secrecy. I, for years, didn't tell anybody that I'd even been to the interview. It took me 20 or more years before I told anybody that I'd actually been interviewed for the job. Now it's kind of, well, that's 40, 50 years ago. It doesn't matter, but it was fun.
I'd say it was. Rob, you seem to a guy that give him a problem and a Rubik's Cube and he'll figure out and adapt and find a solution. Is that something you've had all your life?
I suppose, although not Rubik's Cube, although I did recently, I can't remember the answer, but somebody did give me 5 steps to solve a Rubik's Cube and it always works. But Rubik's Cube, I didn't. But yes, the idea that you come to something and you say, well, how do I solve this? And one of the things is that you have to understand what is the problem. And that's one of the issues that, why is this thing not working? Well, it's not working because of this. Well, why is that? And if you keep asking why, eventually you get to the root of the problem. And it's interesting that that's what most people don't do. And also people try to solve multiple layers of problem all at the same time. There's a little story I can tell you on this. So I was working with some friends, some colleagues, and we were working for a mortgage lender in the United Kingdom, and they were putting out to tender a whole IT development process for the front end of their new system. And they were going to spend about 10, 15 million pounds on this system to build it and get it right. And the board of directors said they wanted to put this tender out and they wanted to make a decision about who they were going to appoint about 4 weeks out from the date we were given this instruction. And I sat down with 2 guys, a guy called Steve and a guy called Barry, and I knew both of them quite well. And we went and sat down in the canteen and said, well, we're going to sort this problem out. And I said, how do we develop this invitation to tender process to make sure we get the right answer to this problem, which is we want the right party to come to the table and help this business develop what it needs developed. And they started panicking. Well, we can't do this. We haven't got enough time for this. And I said, no. You're trying to solve too many things at the same time. So let's just design the perfect tender process. So we did. And so I sat down and said, worked out, we need to do this. We need to provide this information. These are where the interviews are going to take. There's all sorts of things go on in a tender process to provide software development at that scale. I said, that's perfect. Now, do we look at that? If we do that, are we going to get the right answer? Will we have made the right selection? The answer was, yes, it will. And then I said, okay, how long is this going to take? And so that'll take 3 days, it'll take a week, whatever. We added all these pieces up, and the answer came out at 18 weeks. At which point, Barry and Steve all went, no, it's going to take too long. And I said, well, that may be, but we'd have to start again. I said, no, now we have a different problem. The problem now is to collapse that to 4.5 weeks. And we did. Because we weren't trying to solve 2 problems simultaneously. The first problem was, what's the right thing? This is perfect. This is what brilliant looks like. Now then, how do we make brilliant work faster? And, one of the companies that came to us as part of the tender process, there was a guy there who was a part of their sales team, and he'd been through lots of these processes on behalf of them. It was Digital Corporation before they merged with Compaq. And he came to me and he said to me, Rob, he said, you designed that process, didn't you? And I said, yeah. He said, do you know it's the best invitation to tender process I have ever been through? And I've done lots of them.
Wow.
There's the answer. Because I wasn't trying to do everything at the same time. I realized the big problem was quality. Because if you don't put quality in, you're screwed. Getting to do things faster, there's always a way you can overlap stuff and do things in parallel to bring the timetable down. But that's something I've held on to. It was very funny because we got the answer, and in 4.5 weeks we had the answer as the recommendation as to who the company should hire to do the work.
And is this a process you do with every company, every client?
Well, it's that idea that you actually work out what the problem is you're really trying to solve. In that case, the problem was, how do we get a really quality answer to this requirement for who are we going to hire, who are we going to give the money to build this system for us? Because if you hired the wrong people for the wrong reasons, then you weren't going to get the system you wanted. You know, it's like saying to somebody, well, you can go and get me a car. Well, yeah, they can go and get you a car. What do you want? A Lada, a Lexus, or something in between? If you haven't been precise about the quality of car you want, you could have any old pile of crap, or you could have something which is way too expensive. But that's a rough analogy. But nevertheless, I always believe that the quality of what you do is way, way more important. Way, way more important than the speed at which you do it. Because actually, if you do the right thing and you get it right first time, it usually works out faster anyway. Because you don't have to stop partway through and start all over again because you've made the mistake of going down the wrong track to begin
with. It's so powerful. Just do it once, measure twice, cut once, you know?
Yeah. Well, maybe that's also my mother. She did a lot of dressmaking. That was her needle money. She was the sewing machine was virtually never put away apart from Christmas. She was always making dresses, bridesmaids' dresses, doing garment alterations for people she knew and so on. And she would always, you know, if she got to something very tricky, she sometimes would ask me, well, what do I do with it? And we'd actually sit down together. I'd help my mother. So, well, I think you do this. And we'd go work it out. And then she'd cut the fabric. And I had an uncle who was in tailoring. And yeah, this is the same story, you know, measure twice, cut once. People say the same thing, I guess, in the field of joinery and places like that. But if you get that, and again, it's these little things, because you don't at the time think about them, do you? They happen to you whilst you're a kid or you're in your younger years. You just get, it's just part of life. But you get used to it. And there are people who don't do that because they've never had that kind of background. And it's therefore just something they haven't thought about. We just do it, don't we? Well, no, you don't just do, because just doing isn't actually going to achieve much. Why are you doing it is always a good question. And what's the outcome required? And that starts to get you not deliberately thinking about the quality of what you do, but nevertheless, it does drive out quality. So if somebody says to me, well, can we just do X? I say, well, yes, why? Why would you just want to do that? Well, because we can get on. Well, yeah, but is it solving the problem? Well, we think so. Well, how do you know? Don't just go because you think it's the right answer. Do it because you know it's the right answer. And that's a different point. Knowing and being, and thinking aren't the same thing. And yet, the world's full of it. I mean, people think they know what the answer to X is. You could talk about it at a political level, whether it's about immigration or whether it's at the domestic level, about what people do. They do stuff because they think it's the right thing. And of course, as people, as human beings, we all want to do the right thing on the whole, for ourselves, for our family, and for the people we work with. But if you're not really thinking through what you do, then that can be a real difficulty, because you can do the wrong thing. And I've just seen it so many times. I've been in lots of different companies and organizations over the years. And here's the thing, not once have I ever come across an organization that knew what its problem really was, before I got involved. And usually I only got involved after they'd started. So they're already back to doing some stuff, redoing stuff they'd already done because they got it wrong in the first place.
If you walked into a company tomorrow and they had all that, what do you think it would look like?
Well, if I walk into a company and they're not prepared to engage, then I walk away. Because people have got to actually be challenged. There's a problem. and it's a problem, it's perception, I think, Aaron, that people think the boss knows the answer to everything. And actually, in most cases, the boss knows the answer to nothing. The boss controls the resources, though. And if they're a clever boss, they know that I'm going to use these resources to help my people deliver what we together want to deliver as a business to what we're trying to do, what the outcome is we're looking for. And most organizations look to the boss for the answer. And that's a disaster, because the boss should say, well, no, I don't know the answer. I want you guys to go find out. I'm authorizing you to go find out. Here's some resources to go and do it. And maybe it's a few days worth of money to, often in businesses, they talk about man days. How many man days of effort are you going to put into finding out the answer to this thing? Here's a bunch of money. Here's how we calculate what this is worth. Okay, you've got those amount of effort to go and do, and then come back with an answer and tell me what you found. Then we can make a decision as well. Do we go a bit further with this, or do we say, oh, no, that's a bundle of junk, let's go somewhere else? But if you do that, that works. But organizations, in my experience, are not very good at empowering their people to help them find the right answers. The really good bosses, and there are some out there. I've just recently been coaching the MD of a manufacturing business, and he's fabulous. Been great to talk to, because he gets it. He gets and understands that it's not him that's making the decisions, but he gets that he needs to get the right people doing the right things together. He's the guy. It's like a conductor in an orchestra. Most conductors are musicians in some field or other, whether they're a pianist or a violinist or something, but an orchestral conductor usually plays at least one instrument, if not more. But they're not playing those instruments when they're performing. They're bringing on the woodwind. They're bringing on the brass. They're bringing on the strings. They're bringing on the percussion at the right place and at the right tempo and with the right intensity. And it all works, and there you get this beautiful performance, whether that's orchestral classical music or indeed somebody who's leading a rock band. They're doing it, and they're bringing those people together.
They are. Rob, you're a mature man now, and every experience and what your parents left behind ingrained in you. Do you wish you could change anything, or have you more wisdom than you gained, or what do you think?
Oh, I think there's always the way that you wish you'd done a few things earlier or differently. But I've had a very interesting life because I've been involved in so many different fields. I've been in hospitality. I've been obviously in the military. I've worked with engineering businesses, and I've done some crazy things. And some of those have been very unusual. And, you might talk about one or two of them and say, well, how many people have actually spent the time sitting in the bank vault counting money, which is worth tens of millions of pounds? Okay, they haven't, but I've done it. Not that it matters, but it's this one little thing. And you go, okay, there's that little piece. It's like a whole box full of jigsaw pieces that are there, that because each of those things that you've done in life give you, or at least I found, they've given me a certain amount of insight into something else. And as I said to you earlier, I've always been a bit of a generalist. And it's being able to put those pieces together. It's looking at those. Well, that bit belongs to that part of the jigsaw. That bit belongs to that part of the jigsaw. You haven't necessarily done the whole jigsaw, but you kind of look at the colors or the shading or the patterning or whatever, and you've got a really good overview. And I've just been like that. I talk about stuff. As you realize, I'm quite good at talking sometimes, sometimes too much. But you've got to laugh at yourself as well. And laugh at the craziness, because it all is crazy. Because you might argue at the end of the day, what's the point of anything? Well, it's just life. But I want to leave the world a better place than I found it, shall I put it that way? But, it'll be tiny. But it does make a difference. And sometimes it's asking fundamental questions. I was asked many years ago by the UK government to advise on the implementation of a new a new pension scheme where they wanted to introduce. And I went to this consultation, and they said, we want to get this. We want people to sign up, because the idea was that they wanted lots of people at work to have a second pension. So they weren't just going to be reliant on the state pension when they retired, and that would take the pressure off the social security budget for benefits and all sorts of stuff. Good reason. And of course, I had a background in life and pension, so I knew quite a lot about this. And I had a conversation with the guy who was running this workshop. And just before lunch, I took him to one side and I said, if there's one thing you should do, instead of dangling all these carrots to get people to sign up for this new pension, one thing you should do is just make it compulsory. And he looked at me, and he was a 20-something guy. He was a nice lad. And he looked at me, and this was about 2006, I think it's happened. He looked at me utterly gobsmacked. He said, "That's an amazing idea." And I said, "Oh, come on, surely somebody else has suggested it." And he said, "No." He said, "How many of these consultations have you been at?" He said, "Well, 5 or 6. I said, "I've said all of them." He said, "Yeah, nobody's raised this once." What happened subsequently was the government introduced the legislation for this pension and made it compulsory. So now there are no more than 15 million people in the United Kingdom have a second pension because I opened my mouth in a short conversation which lasted less than 10 minutes. That's the point. If you do things, it's dropping a pebble in an enormous lake. The ripples just went everywhere. And there are 15 million people out there who don't even know I exist. But they've got a better retirement to look forward to than would have been the case otherwise, because most of them wouldn't have ended up in the second pension. They'd have relied on the state and they've had nothing else to fall back on. Now, the value to that was enormous. And I think it's brilliant. But it's not something that I got a huge pat on the back for. I didn't get paid for it. But it saved the UK Treasury billions because they were going to give people £200 a head to sign up for this thing. So you work that out, £200 a head times 15 million people. That's a lot of money. That's 3 billion sterling. And never mind the downstream.
Yeah.
But it's all about that business of being able to say, I can see something here and you're not seeing it. The guy didn't see it. He thought, we need to do this. We need to make it attractive. Yes, you do. You need to make this scheme attractive to the people. But the one thing they had in their arsenal was the ability by law to make it compulsory that people had to sign up for this, or their employers had to sign them up. There were some reasons they could get out, but basically more than 15 million people now have a pension who wouldn't have had that second pension. And they look at it and they think, well, if that's only the only thing I've ever done, that's worth it. But of course, it's not something you personally get recognition for because nobody knows. These things just happen. Somebody has to have the idea.
For sure. Rob, you've been in business, you've been in everything. What are your top 3 secrets that you feel the world should know?
Oh gosh, that's a good one. I think quality is just focus on doing the right things. It's a qualitative thing. It's not the speed. It's the qualitative thing. Because that applied. I've been a youth leader. I was a scout leader for 10 years. And all the time when you're working with people, when you're working with kids, it's the quality of what you do. You don't tell people. So I think that one of the things is to actually help people to understand what they can do. So when I was working with scouts and sort of 10 to 14-year-old boys, it was about empowering them to make their decisions and not telling them, well, you do this and then that. It's, well, if you want this thing to happen, what do you think you can do? So it's that questioning, how do you think you can achieve this? And being there to stop them doing something stupid or making dangerous, But on the other hand, good grief, I've nearly blown myself up a few times. I actually set fire to a petrol can once by accident, and I had to lean out and put the cap back on the petrol can while it was still alight. It's not something I recommend, I can tell you, because if they'd gone up boom, it wouldn't have just been me; it would have been my car, which was standing about 10 yards away. These are things you look at. But you asked me the question, what things? I think you've got a sense of humor. You've got to actually not be pompous. You've got to understand your own values, but you've also got to help other people understand theirs, and then bring those together. It's more the orchestral conductor piece. It's not do this 3 things, because I don't think there are 3 things. It's a philosophy. It's that philosophy of, well, we're in this together. Let's make it work. Oh, and by the way, let's have some good fun while we're doing it. Because, to be honest, I think business can be such brilliant fun. I mean, you could have some wonderful times. I worked in a company where we used to, on a Friday afternoon in the marketing department, send out and bring in some bottles of wine. And we'd sit there with a glass of wine at the end of our desk, finishing off on a Friday afternoon. I've worked with lots of organizations. I've often asked the question, would you let your people drink in the workplace? And the answer is, oh, no, we can't do that. But I worked in an organization where it was accepted that we would have a glass of wine and be perfectly responsible human beings. And there's an interesting thing about that. It passed the message to those people in our marketing department that we trust you. You can have a glass of wine whilst you're doing the Friday afternoon work. And if somebody came in to visit us for a business meeting, would you like a glass while you're here? No? Fine. There's a whole drink drive thing issue. Leave that aside. But we would do it. It told those people, we trust you. And that was worth way more because it was a behavioral thing. You can be in an organization where the boss, whoever they are, say, oh, you're empowered, we trust you, whatever. And then they do all the things which tell you they don't really mean it. But then there's a situation like that where they said, well, it's okay. Here's a glass. Have a sip of white wine. Continue doing your paperwork. Cheers, guys. Oh, do you feel relaxed? Do you feel valued? Do you feel trusted? If you can answer that question truthfully, then you can say to somebody, in your organization, do you feel trusted? Do those behaviors from above mean that they show that you trust you? Or indeed, do you, as the boss, do things which show you trust people and you're not over them, micromanaging them all the time? You can say, this is what we need done. And maybe you can do it in 2 hours. Well, fine. Then take the rest of the day off, because actually it doesn't matter. It's not about the number of hours you're sitting behind the desk. It's what you do when you're sitting at that desk or doing whatever it is you do that matters. And when you get an organization and management which recognize that that's a better way of managing people, then the results are fabulous, because people do stuff. They will work hard, but they will also play, and they'll have fun, and they know that they're not being slave driven. And I just think it's great.
Wow. Rob, you've got a book, and where can we find you and get to know more about you? Because you seem like you're a gem in the coal that's been polished into a diamond over these years.
Well, I don't know about that, but the book, it's an interesting one here. So there you are. 101 Executive Uses for a Square Camel. That's a book I've written, and it's available on Amazon worldwide. It's only available in print. It's full of creativity techniques that people can use in the workplace, and it explains why they work and how they work and in what circumstances you might use them, from creative ways to get to the root of problems to creative ways to design the solution to problems that aren't always easy to divine the solutions to. Because again, most people leap to a solution, or we'll just have that one off the shelf. Well, that might not be the right answer. So it's great. And there isn't anything like it out there now. There used to be other books, but that's the important thing. What is it you can see that's creative about that? Well, there's a whole bunch of things about it. It's actually a real fun way of doing work. I did some work for the UK Immigration Service some years ago, and I wanted to get people along to do some work on designing a process in a department, in the asylum department, dealing with asylum claims. And to get them involved, they knew they were coming to the workshop. And I said, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a little exercise. And I put up a challenge. And I said, I want you to come up with 100 ways for eating a cream donut. And they gave them, we did it in about 3 minutes. And we didn't get to 100. We did about 70 different ways of eating a cream donut. What they didn't know was I'd hidden a box of cream donuts behind the back of the screen. So I then brought them out and said, right, here you are, guys. Now then, here's your chance to go and eat the cream donuts in any of the ways that are on that board. What I used that for was a way of getting, because I took them through some techniques to come out with these ways. And that became a fun thing. So they went, oh, wow, this is fun. So now we're going to use those techniques to solve the problem we're really here to solve, which is how we're going to redesign this department to actually make it work better. And so we did that. Well, two things came out of that. Next time I ran a workshop, people were queuing up to get there because they thought they might get cream donuts if they turned up. So they weren't sure. So there was always Rob's workshops are always good fun. So maybe there's some benefit. But the other side of it was we redesigned the process that they were working with. And that was fabulous because we actually got a 70% improvement in productivity out of a bunch of people doing a job they already were doing, but we redesigned the way they were doing it. Didn't give them any technology, just redesigned the way, the responsibility and how their work flowed. And they got a 70% productivity improvement. They were gobsmacked. That was worth, I was then asked to roll that out across 900 staff, and it was worth $3 million a year in productivity gain. This was back in 97. I mean, but it's that idea that you don't have to just be dry and cream donuts and square camels or all sorts of other ideas are all there to get the brain working. And the reason is very simple. When we're relaxed, our brain works better. When we're happy and being playful, our brain works really well. And actually, what you want to do in business when you're problem solving is turbocharge the brain, make it work faster. When I was teaching with the Open University, I used to be running workshops, and I'd have full English breakfast, full cooked breakfast, coffee and biscuits in the mid-morning, 3-course lunch, maybe tea and cake in the afternoon, maybe not, 4-course dinner, then hit the bar. So you can imagine all those calories.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I used to lose weight because this was on turbo drive.
Excuse me. Yes.
And that was burning them off faster than I was eating them. So you could imagine going on somewhere and eating that diet for 4 days, you'd come back expecting to put on a few kilos. No, I used to lose weight every time. And the first time it happened, I thought, what happened here? Are the scales sticky? And then I suddenly realized, no, I'd switched my brain on. So yeah, go switch your brain on, but be playful.
Incredible. Rob, I want to say thank you so much. This has been a blast, entertaining and educational, and thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. And I hope
it just shows you planning is so important. The 4 P's in business is the 4 P's of life, and just shows you there. Rob indicates us in many examples that planning is important. So remember, when you're thinking about achieving a goal or success, make sure you have a plan and follow that plan, because that plan is what makes us successful. Tune in next Tuesday and see what incredible insights the next guest will bring. And remember, you rock on.
Thank you for listening to the Aron O'Dowd Show, where the world's best stories are told. If you like, please post a review or subscribe to the show. To find out more, contact us at aronodowd.com. That's ARONODOWD.com. We're always ready to share another magnificent tale from the world's best storytellers. So stay tuned and rock on.